Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade did not hurt as much as the look in his eyes, cold, shattered, and devoid of the warmth that had once promised me forever. Red bloomed across the white ceremonial robes I wore, a stark, violent contrast to the pristine marble of the throne room, spreading rapidly like a spilled goblet of vintage wine. My knees hit the stone with a sickening crack, not from the force of the blow, but from the sheer exhaustion of holding up a world that had been crumbling for months. Above me, the man I had loved across 3 lifetimes, the man I had betrayed my own soul to save, stood with his sword tip dripping, his chest heaving with a rage that masked a terrifying grief. General Kalen Varric, the Empire's silver wolf, loomed like an executioner. "Speak," Kalen roared, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings, shaking the dust from the banners of the houses we had conquered together. He stepped closer, the heavy tread of his boots vibrating against my palms pressed to the floor. "Tell me where the poison is hidden. Tell me, Lucian, and I will make your end quick. It is your last chance." I looked up, my vision blurring at the edges, fighting the encroaching darkness. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream the truth, that there was no poison hidden in the city, that the toxin was already coursing through my veins because I had drunk his cup an hour ago. But the blood-silent seal burned on my tongue, a magical gag order placed by the Emperor himself. If I spoke the truth, Kalen would be executed for high treason by association. So, I did the only thing I could. I smiled, a jagged, bloody thing. I had no chances left to give him, because I had already given him my life. To understand the end, one must understand the beginning. We were never meant to be lovers. We were barely meant to be allies. Kalen was the illegitimate son of the North, a brute force of nature carved from ice and iron, while I was the scholar from the South, a creature of ink, whispers, and court intrigue. 6 months ago, the capital of Ethelgard was a viper's nest. I was the royal spy master, a position that required a flexible morality and a heart of stone. Kalen was the newly appointed high commander, a man who despised politics and solved problems with the edge of a blade. Our first meeting had been in the War Council. He had called my strategy cowardly. I had called his tactics suicidal. By the end of the night, he had pinned me against the rough stone wall of the armory, intending to intimidate me. Instead, the friction between us, sharp, electric, and undeniable, had ignited a fire that burned through every defense I had constructed since childhood. He was dominance personified, a man who took what he wanted, and I, who had spent my life manipulating others from the shadows, found a perverse, overwhelming relief in surrendering control to him. Behind closed doors, the High Commander and the Spy Master did not discuss tactics. We spoke in the language of bruised skin, tangled sheets, and desperate, hushed confessions in the dark. "You think too much, Lucian," Kalen had whispered one night, his hand large and warm against the nape of my neck, his thumb tracing the pulse that hammered there. "One day, that mind of yours will trap you. And when it does?" I had asked, tracing the jagged scar on his chest. "Then I will cut you out," he promised. "I will tear down the walls you build, brick by brick." He didn't know that the walls weren't there to keep people out. They were there to keep the monsters in. The trouble began with the Emperor's decline. Paranoia had seized the throne. The Emperor believed Kalen's popularity with the army was a prelude to a coup. He summoned me to the Obsidian Chamber 3 months ago. The wolf grows too hungry. The Emperor had rasped, his skin gray and rotting from the dark magic he practiced. "You will find evidence of his treason, Lucian, or you will manufacture it. General Varric is loyal, Your Majesty," I had argued, keeping my head bowed. "Loyalty is a currency that devalues with time," the Emperor sneered. He stood, shambling toward me, and placed a withered hand on my forehead. "You love him. Do not bother denying it. I see the threads of fate binding you. That is why you are perfect." He cast the blood silence then. It was an ancient, forbidden hex. I was tasked to spy on Kalen, to plant evidence of a rebellion he wasn't leading. If I refused, or if I tried to warn Kalen or anyone else about the Emperor's plot, the magic would boil my blood, and then it would jump to the person I loved most. Kalen would die instantly if I tried to save him with words. I had to save him with actions. I had to become the villain. For 3 months, I played the part. I distanced myself from Kalen. I leaked false information to his rivals. I watched the confusion in his eyes turn to hurt, and then to a cold, hard hatred. It was a slow, agonizing torture, like cutting off my own limbs one by one. The climax of this tragedy arrived tonight, at the winter solstice banquet. I had discovered the Emperor's final plan. He wasn't going to wait for a trial. He had poisoned the ceremonial wine, the wine Kalen was required to drink during the toast. It was a fast-acting neurotoxin, designed to mimic a heart attack. I couldn't warn him. The seal prevented it. I couldn't knock the cup from his hand without triggering the guards to kill him for insubordination. So, I had intercepted the wine steward. I had distracted him, used a sleight of hand I hadn't practiced since my days as a street urchin, and swapped the goblets. I drank the poison, but the Emperor was watching. He saw me drink. He knew I had defied him. And so, with his final ounce of malice before retiring to his chambers, he whispered a lie into Kalen's ear. Asterisk. Your spy master has poisoned the city's water supply. He plans to ransom the antidote for the throne. Asterisk. It was a clumsy lie, but Kalen was already primed to believe the worst of me. The betrayal of the last 3 months had done its work. Which brought us here. To the blood on the floor. Kalen grabbed my collar, hauling me up. My legs were useless, dead weight dragging on the marble. The poison was working faster than I anticipated. My extremities were numb, and a cold fog was settling over my mind. Why, Lucian? Kalen's voice cracked. It wasn't a shout anymore. It was a plea. He shook me, his grip bruising. We were everything. I would have burned the world for you. Why did you sell us for power? I coughed, blood spattering against his cheek. He flinched, but didn't let go. I looked into his eyes the color of a stormy sea. I needed him to know, but I couldn't speak. My hand trembled as I reached up, my fingers brushing the tear track that cut through the blood on his face. Asterisk. I didn't sell us, my love. I bought you time. Asterisk. The antidote. I rasped, skirting the edge of the curse. The pain in my chest was blinding, a supernova of agony. There is no poison in the water. Liar. Kalen slammed me back down. The Emperor himself saw you tampering with the supplies. Admit it. The poison. I gasped, fighting for air as my lungs began to paralyze. It's in me. Kalen froze. The rage in his face stalled, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He looked at the blood pooling around me, too much blood for a simple flesh wound from his sword. He looked at my lips, which were turning a distinct, cyanotic blue, the hallmark of the nightshade blend the Emperor favored. What? Kalen whispered. He dropped his sword. The clang was deafening in the silence. He fell to his knees, his hands hovering over me, terrified to touch, terrified to realize what he was seeing. Lucian. The cup. I managed to choke out, the darkness closing in like a heavy velvet curtain. His cup. I took it. The realization hit Kalen with the force of a physical blow. The color drained from his face, leaving him as pale as the marble. He understood. In a split second, the last 3 months recontextualized themselves in his mind. The distance. The coldness. The supposed betrayal. No, he breathed, gathering me into his arms. The heat of his body was shocking against my icy skin. No, no, no. You fool. You absolute, self-sacrificing idiot. He shouted for a medic, a roar that tore his throat, raw and primal. Healers. Get the healers. Now, but we both knew it was too late. The nightshade was absolute. Lucian, look at me, Kalen commanded, his voice trembling. He pressed his hand over the wound he had inflicted, as if he could push the life back into me. Stay with me. That is an order. I am your commander, and I order you to stay. I smiled weakly. You were always bossy, and you were always stubborn. He sobbed, tears falling freely now, landing on my face, mixing with the blood. He rocked me back and forth. Why didn't you tell me? We could have fought him together. I tapped my lips. Seal, I mouthed. Kalen's eyes widened in horror. He recognized the magic now, the faint, shimmering residue of the spell breaking as my life force faded. The blood silence. He gagged you. Kalen hissed, a rage darker and deeper than before rising in him. He made you suffer this alone. My vision was gone. I could only feel him now. The strength of his arms, the frantic beating of his heart against my ear. It was a good way to die, better than the cold, lonely death of a traitor in a cell. I was in the arms of the wolf. "Kalen," I whispered, the sound barely audible. "I'm here. I'm right here, Lucian. Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," he cried, burying his face in my neck. "Nothing. You saved me. You saved me and I struck you down. Love." The darkness took me then. It wasn't scary. It was just quiet. I didn't expect to wake up. When I did, it was to pain. A dull, throbbing ache that permeated every inch of my body. The smell of antiseptic and burning herbs hung heavy in the air. I forced my eyes open. The light was dim. I was in a room I recognized, Kalen's private chambers in the northern estate. The heavy furs, the smell of pine and steel. I tried to move, but a weight on my hand stopped me. Kalen was asleep in a chair next to the bed, his head resting on the mattress, his hand clasping mine so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked terrible. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, stubble covered his jaw. He was still wearing the clothes from the banquet, now stained and rumpled. I squeezed his hand. His head snapped up instantly. For a second, he looked at me as if I were a ghost. Then, the reality crashed into him. "Lucian." His voice was a wreck, raspy and broken. "Water," I croaked. He scrambled, nearly knocking over the chair, pouring a glass from a pitcher with trembling hands. He supported my head as I drank, his touch so gentle it made my chest ache. When I finished, I fell back against the pillows, exhausted. "How?" I asked. Kalen set the glass down. He looked away, his jaw tightening. The imperial physician. He had the only antidote. He refused to give it up. I studied Kalen's profile. The hard set of his mouth. The coldness in his eyes that wasn't directed at me, but at the world. "Kalen," I said softly. "What did you do?" He turned back to me, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. It was the look of a man who had crossed a line he could never uncross. "I took the palace," he said simply. "I slaughtered the royal guard. I dragged the emperor from his throne and I extracted the location of the antidote from the physician." My breath hitched. "You committed treason. Real treason." "I don't care," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a fierce growl. He leaned over me, placing his hands on either side of my head, boxing me in. "I would burn this entire empire to ash before I let you die for me again. Do you understand?" I stared up at him. The power dynamic had shifted again. He was no longer the betrayed lover, and I was no longer the silent martyr. We were fugitives. We were usurpers. "The emperor?" I asked. "Dead," Kalen said without a flicker of remorse. "His head is on a pike at the city gates." He lowered his forehead to rest against mine. "You are free, Lucian. The seal is broken. You never have to be silent again." I reached up, tangling my fingers in his hair. "And you? What are you now? An emperor?" "No," he murmured, brushing his lips against mine, a tentative, desperate kiss that tasted of salt and salvation. "I am just a man who almost lost his soul. I am yours. Command me, spymaster. Tell me what we do next." I looked at the man who had conquered a kingdom just to save my life. The man who had been my enemy, my lover, my executioner, and my savior. "Kiss me," I whispered. And then, we rewrite history. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Kalen burn the world for Lucian, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who nearly killed you, even if they didn't know the truth? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.